Americans, like Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump's personal attorney, and two individuals now indicted who worked with him, Igor Fruman and Lev Parnas. Lutsenko, Giuliani, Fruman, Parnas, and others who would come to include the president's own son, Don Jr., promoted a smear campaign against her based on false allegations. At the State Department, there was an effort to push back, to obtain a statement of support from Secretary Pompeo, but those efforts failed when it became clear that President Trump wanted her gone. Some have argued that a president has the ability to nominate or remove any ambassador he wants, that they serve at the pleasure of the president, and that is true. The question before us is not whether Donald Trump could recall an American ambassador with a stellar reputation for fighting corruption in Ukraine, but why would he want to? Why did Rudy Giuliani want her gone, and why did Donald Trump? And why would Donald Trump instruct the new team he put in place, the three amigos, Gordon Sondland, Rick Perry, and Kurt Volker, to work with the same man, Rudy Giuliani, who played such a central role in the smear campaign against her? Rudy Giuliani has made no secret of his desire to get Ukraine to open investigations into the Bidens, as well as a conspiracy theory of Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. As he said in one interview in May 2019, we're not meddling in an election, we're meddling in an investigation, which we have a right to do. More recently, he told CNN's Chris Cuomo, "Of course I did," when asked if he had pressed Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. And he has never been shy about who he is doing this work for, his client, the president. One powerful ally Giuliani had in Ukraine to promote these political investigations was Lutsenko, the corrupt former prosecutor general. And one powerful adversary Lutsenko had was a certain United States ambassador named Marie Yovanovitch. It is no coincidence that in the now infamous July 25th call with Zelensky, Donald Trump brings up a corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor and praises him. Against all evidence, Trump claims that this former prosecutor general was very good, and he was shut down, and that's really unfair. But the woman known for fighting corruption, his own former ambassador, the woman ruthlessly smeared and driven from her post, the president does nothing but disparage, or worse, threaten. Well, she's going to go through some things, the president declares. That tells you a lot about the president's priorities and intentions. Getting rid of Ambassador Yovanovitch helped set the stage for an irregular channel that could pursue the two investigations that mattered so much to the president: the 2016 conspiracy theory, and most important, an investigation into the 2020 political opponent he apparently feared most, Joe Biden. And the president's scheme might have worked, but for the fact that the man who would succeed Ambassador Yovanovitch, whom we heard from on Wednesday, Acting Ambassador Taylor, would eventually discover the effort to press Ukraine into conducting these investigations and would push back, but for the fact also that someone blew the whistle. Ambassador Yovanovitch was serving our nation's interest in fighting corruption in Ukraine, but she was considered an obstacle to the furtherance of the president's personal and political agenda. For that, she was smeared and cast aside. The powers of the presidency are immense, but they are not absolute, and they cannot be used for corrupt purpose. The American people expect their president to use the authority they grant him in the service of the nation, not to destroy others to advance his personal or political interests. I now recognize Ranking Member Nunes for his remarks.
I thank the gentleman. It's unfortunate that today and for most of next week we will continue engaging in the Democrats' day-long TV spectacles instead of solving the problems we were all sent to Washington to address. We now have a major trade agreement with Canada and Mexico ready for approval, a deal that would create jobs and boost our economy. Meanwhile, we have not yet approved funding for the government, which expires next week. along with funding for our men and women in uniform. Instead, the Democrats have convened us once again to advance their operation to topple a duly elected president. I'll note that five Democrats on this committee had already voted to impeach this president before the Trump-Zelensky phone call occurred. In fact, Democrats have been vowing to oust President Trump since the day he was elected. So Americans can rightly suspect that his phone call with President Zelensky was used as an excuse for the Democrats to fulfill their Watergate fantasies. But I'm glad that on Wednesday, after the Democrats staged 6 weeks of secret depositions in the basement of the Capitol, like some kind of strange cult, the American people finally got to see this farce for themselves. They saw us sit through hours of hearsay testimony about conversations that two diplomats who had never spoken to the president heard secondhand, third-hand, and fourth-hand from other people. In other words, rumors. The problem of trying to overthrow a president based on this type of evidence is obvious. But that's what their whole case relies on, beginning with second-hand and third-hand information cited by the whistleblower. That's why on Wednesday, the Democrats were forced to make the absurd argument that hearsay can be much better evidence than direct evidence. And just when you thought the spectacle couldn't get more bizarre, committee Republicans received a memo from the Democrats threatening ethics referrals if we out the whistleblower. As the Democrats are well aware, no Republicans here know the whistleblower's identity because the whistleblower only met with Democrats, not with Republicans. Chairman Schiff claimed not to know who it is, yet he also vowed to block us from asking questions that could reveal his or her identity. Republicans on this committee are left wondering how it's even possible for the chairman to block questions about a person whose identity he claims not to know. The American people may be seeing these absurdities for the first time, but Republicans on this dais are used to them. Until they secretly met with the whistleblower, Democrats showed little interest for the last 3 years in any topic aside from the ridiculous conspiracy theories that President Trump is a Russian agent. When you find yourself on the phone, like the Democrats did with Russian pranksters offering you nude pictures of Trump, and afterward you order your staff to follow up and get the photos, as the Democrats also did, then it might be time to ask yourself if you've gone out too far on a limb. Even as they were accusing Republicans of colluding with Russians, the Democrats themselves were colluding with Russians by funding the Steele dossier, which was based on Russian and Ukrainian sources. Meanwhile, they turn a blind eye to Ukrainians meddling in our elections because the Democrats were cooperating with that operation. This was the subject of a July 20th, 2017 letter sent by Senator Grassley to then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. The letter raised concerns about the activities of Alexander Chalupa, a contractor for the Democratic National Committee, who worked with Ukrainian embassy officials to spread dirt on the Trump campaign. As Senator Grassley wrote, Chalupa's actions appear to show that she was simultaneously working on behalf of a foreign government, Ukraine, and on behalf of the DNC and the Clinton campaign in an effort to influence not only the U.S. voting population, but U.S. government officials, unquote. After touting the Steele dossier and defending the FBI's Russia investigation, which are now being investigated by Inspector General Horowitz and Attorney General Barr, Democrats on this committee ignore Ukrainian election meddling, even though Chalupa publicly admitted to the Democrats' scheme. Likewise, they are blind to the blaring signs of corruption surrounding Hunter Biden's well-paid position on the board of a corrupt Ukrainian company, while his father served as vice president and point man for Ukraine issues in the Obama administration. But the Democrats' media hacks only cared about that issue briefly, when they were trying to stop Joe Biden from running against Hillary Clinton in 2015. As I previously stated, these hearings should not be occurring at all until we get the answers to three crucial questions the Democrats refuse to ask. First, what is the full extent of the Democrats' prior coordination with the whistleblower, and who else did the whistleblower coordinate this effort with? Second, what is the full extent of Ukraine's election meddling against the Trump campaign? And third, why did Burisma hire Hunter Biden? What did he do for them? And did his position affect any government actions under the Obama administration? I'll note that House Democrats vowed they would not put the American people through a wrenching impeachment process without bipartisan support, and they have none. Add that to their ever-growing list of broken promises and destructive deceptions. In closing, Mr. Chair, the President of the United States released his transcript right before the hearing began. I think it's important that I read this into the record so that there's no confusion over this first phone call that occurred on April 21st with President-elect Zelensky, and I'd like to read it. The President: I'd like to congratulate you on a job well done, and congratulations on a fantastic election. Zelensky, good to hear from you. Thank you so very much. It's nice to hear from you, and I appreciate the congratulations. The President: that was an incredible election. Zelensky: again, thank you so very much. As you can see, we tried very hard to do our best. We had you as a great example. The President: I think you will do a great job. I have many friends in Ukraine who know you and like you. I have many friends from Ukraine and frankly expected you to win. And it's really an amazing thing that you've done. I guess in a way, I did something similar. We're making tremendous progress in the U.S. We have the most tremendous economy ever. I just wanted to congratulate you. I have no doubt you will be a fantastic president. Zelensky: first of all, thank you so very much, again, for the congratulations. We in Ukraine are an independent country, an independent Ukraine. We're going to do everything for the people. You are, as I said, a great example. We are hoping we can expand on our jobs as you did. You will also be a great example for many. You are a great example for our new managers. I'd also like to invite you, if possible, to the inauguration. I know how busy you are, but if it's possible for you to come to the inauguration ceremony, that would be great. Great for you to be with us on that day. The President: that's very nice. I'll look into that and give us a date. At the very minimum, we'll have a great representative or more from the United States will be with you on that great day. So we will have somebody at a minimum, a very, very high level, and will be with you. Really an incredible day for an incredible achievement. Zelensky: again, thank you. We're looking forward to your visit, to the visit of a high-level delegation, but there's no words that can describe our wonderful country, how nice, warm, and friendly our people are, how tasty and delicious our food is, and how wonderful Ukraine is. Words cannot describe our country, so it would be best for you to see it yourself. So if you can come, that would be great. So again, I invite you to come. The President: well, I agree with you about your country, and I look forward to it. When I owned Miss Universe, they always had great people. Ukraine always very well represented, was always very well represented. When you're settled in and ready, I'd like to invite you to the White House. We'll have a lot of things to talk about, but we're with you all the way. Zelensky: thank you for the invitation. We accept the invitation and look forward to the visit. Thank you again. The whole team and I are looking forward to the visit. Thank you for the congratulations, and I think it will still be great if you could come and be with us on this important day. The results are incredible. They're very impressive for us. So it will be absolutely fantastic if you could come on that day. The President: very good. We'll let you know very soon, and we will see you very, very soon regardless. Congratulations, and please say hello to the Ukrainian people and your family. Let them know I send my best regards. Well, thank you, Zelensky. Well, thank you. You have a safe flight and see you soon. President, take care of yourself and give a great speech today. You take care of yourself and I'll see you soon. Zelensky, thank you very much. It's difficult for me, but I will practice English and I will meet in English. Thank you very much. The President laughing. Oh, that's beautiful to hear. That's really good. I could not do it in your language. I'm very impressed. Thank you so much. Zelensky, thank you so much. The President, good day. Good luck. I'm glad I was able to read that into the record so now the American people know the very first call that President Trump had with President Zelensky. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman is not recognized. I do want to comment,
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order under H.Res. 660.
The gentleman will state her point of order.
The point of order is, will the chairman continue to prohibit witnesses from answering Republican questions, as you've done in closed hearings and as you did this week when you interrupted our questions?
That is not a proper point of order. The gentleman will suspend.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I have a
The gentleman is not recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order.
The gentleman is not recognized.
I have a point of order, though.
The gentleman is not recognized. I do want to respond. I allowed the ranking member to.
I have a point of order.
The gentleman is not recognized.
Mr. Chairman, there are 4 transcripts that have not been released.
The gentleman is not recognized.
Holy
The ranking
cow.
member was allowed to exceed the opening statement, and I was happy to allow him to do so. I do want to respond to the call record. First of all, I'm grateful that the President has released the call record. I would now ask the President to release the thousands of other records that he has instructed the State Department not to release, including Ambassador Taylor's notes, including Ambassador Taylor's cable, including George Kent's memo, including documents from the Office of Management and Budget about why the military aid was withheld.
Mr. Chairman, I want you to release the 4 transcripts of depositions. That's my point of order.
The gentleman will suspend. We would ask the President to stop obstructing the impeachment inquiry. And while we're grateful he has released a single document, he has nonetheless obstructed witnesses in their testimony and the production of thousands and thousands of other records. And finally, I would say this, Mr. President. I hope you'll explain to the country today why it was after this call and while the Vice President was making plans to attend the inauguration that you instructed the Vice President not to attend Zelensky's inauguration.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order. Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order under
H.R. is not recognized.
So we know clearly you're going to interrupt us throughout this hearing.
The gentlewoman is not recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Today, no.
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous
The
consent
gentleman is not recognized. Today we are joined by Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. She was born in Canada to parents who fled the Soviet Union and the Nazis. Ambassador Yovanovitch immigrated to Connecticut at 3, became a naturalized American at 18, and entered the U.S. Foreign Service in 1986. She has served as U.S. Ambassador 3 times and been nominated by presidents of both parties. George W. Bush nominated her to be ambassador to the Kyrgyz Republic, where she served from 2005 to 2008. President Obama then nominated her to be U.S. ambassador to Armenia, where she served from 2008 until 2011. And U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, where she served from 2016 until she was recalled to Washington by President Trump this May. Beyond these ambassadorial posts, she has held numerous other senior positions at the State Department, including in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. She served as a dean at the Foreign Service Institute and taught national security strategy at the Defense University. She also previously served at U.S. embassies in Kiev, Ottawa, Moscow, London, and Mogadishu. Ambassador Yovanovitch has received multiple honors from the Department for her diplomatic work, including the Presidential Distinguished Service Award and the Secretary's Diplomacy and Human Rights Award. 2 final points before our witness is sworn. First, witness depositions as part of this inquiry were unclassified in nature, and all open hearings will also be held at the unclassified level. Any information that may touch unclassified information will be addressed separately. Second, Congress will not tolerate any reprisal, threat of reprisal, or attempt to retaliate against any U.S. government official for testifying before Congress, including you or any of your colleagues. If you would please rise and raise your right hand, I will begin by swearing you in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Let the record show that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record. With that, Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Nunes, and other members of the committee.
And Ambassador, you'll need to speak very close to the microphone.
Thank you for the opportunity to start with this statement, to reintroduce myself to the committee, and to highlight parts of my biography and experience. I come before you as an American citizen who has devoted the majority of my life, 33 years, to service to the country that all of us love. Like my colleagues, I entered the Foreign Service understanding that my job was to implement the foreign policy interests of this nation as defined by the President and Congress, and to do so regardless of which person or party was in power. I had no agenda other than to pursue our stated foreign policy goals. My service is an expression of gratitude for all that this country has given to me and to my family. My late parents did not have the good fortune to come of age in a free society. My father fled the Soviets before ultimately finding refuge in the United States. My mother's family escaped the USSR after the Bolshevik Revolution, and she grew up stateless in Nazi Germany before also eventually making her way to the United States. Their personal histories, my personal history, gave me both deep gratitude towards the United States and great empathy for others, like the Ukrainian people who want to be free. I joined the Foreign Service during the Reagan administration and subsequently served 3 other Republican presidents as well as 2 Democratic presidents. It was my great honor to be appointed to serve as an ambassador 3 times, twice by George W. Bush and once by Barack Obama. There is a perception that diplomats lead a comfortable life, throwing dinner parties in fancy homes. Let me tell you about some of my reality. It has not always been easy. I have moved 13 times and served in 7 different countries, 5 of them hardship posts. My first tour was Mogadishu, Somalia, an increasingly dangerous place as that country's civil war kept grinding on and the government was weakening. The military took over policing functions in a particularly brutal way, and basic services disappeared. Several years later, after the Soviet Union collapsed, I helped open our embassy in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. As we were establishing relations with a new country, our small embassy was attacked by a gunman who sprayed the embassy building with gunfire. I later served in Moscow. In 1993, during the attempted coup in Russia, I was caught in crossfire between presidential and parliamentary forces. It took us 3 tries, me without a helmet or body armor, to get into a vehicle to go to the embassy. We went because the ambassador asked us to come, and we went because it was our duty. From August 2016 until May 2019, I served as the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. During my tenure in Ukraine, I went to the front line approximately 10 times during a hot war to show the American flag, to hear what was going on, sometimes literally as we heard the impact of artillery, and to see how our assistance dollars were being put to use. I worked to advance U.S. policy, fully embraced by Democrats and Republicans alike, to help Ukraine become a stable and independent democratic state with a market economy integrated into Europe. A secure, democratic, and free Ukraine serves not just the Ukrainian people, but the American people as well. That's why it was our policy, continues to be our policy, to help the Ukrainians achieve their objectives. They match our objectives. The U.S. is the most powerful country in the history of the world, in large part because of our values. And our values have made possible the network of alliances and partnerships that that buttresses our own strength. Ukraine, with an enormous landmass and a large population, has the potential to be a significant commercial and political partner for the United States, as well as a force multiplier on the security side. We see the potential in Ukraine. Russia by contrast, sees the risk. The history is not written yet, but Ukraine could move out of Russia's orbit. And now Ukraine is a battleground for great power competition, with a hot war for the control of territory and a hybrid war to control Ukraine's leadership. The U.S. has provided significant security assistance since the onset of the war against Russia in 2014. And the Trump administration strengthened our policy by approving the provision to Ukraine of anti-tank missiles known as Javelins. Supporting Ukraine is the right thing to do. It's also the smart thing to do. If Russia prevails and Ukraine falls to Russian dominion, we can expect to see other attempts by Russia to expand its territory and its influence. As critical as the war against Russia is, Ukraine's struggling democracy has an equally important challenge, battling the Soviet legacy of corruption which has pervaded Ukraine's government. Corruption makes Ukraine's leaders ever vulnerable to Russia, and the Ukrainian people understand that. That's why they launched the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, demanding to be a part of Europe, demanding the transformation of the system, demanding to live under the rule of law. Ukrainians wanted the law to apply equally to all people, whether the individual in question is the president or any other citizen. It was a question of fairness, of dignity. Here again, there is a coincidence of interests. Corrupt leaders are inherently less trustworthy, while an honest and accountable Ukrainian leadership makes a U.S.-Ukrainian partnership more reliable and more valuable to the United States. A level playing field in this strategically located country, bordering 4 NATO allies, creates an environment in which U.S. business can more easily trade, invest, and profit. Corruption is also a security issue, because corrupt officials are vulnerable to Moscow. In short, it is in America's national security interest to help Ukraine transform into a country where the rule of law governs and corruption is held in check. It was and remains a top U.S. priority to help Ukraine fight corruption, and significant progress has been made since the 2014 Revolution of Dignity. Unfortunately, as the past couple of months have underlined, not all Ukrainians embraced our anti-corruption work. Thus, perhaps it was not surprising that when our anti-corruption efforts got in the way of a desire for profit or power, Ukrainians who preferred to play by the old corrupt rules sought to remove me. What continues to amaze me is that they found Americans willing to partner with them, and working together, they apparently succeeded in orchestrating the removal of a U.S. ambassador. How could our system fail like this? How is it that foreign corrupt interests could manipulate our government? Which country's interests are served when the very corrupt behavior we have been criticizing is allowed to prevail? Such conduct undermines the U.S., exposes our friends, and widens the playing field for autocrats like President Putin. Our leadership depends on the power of our example and the consistency of our purpose. Both have now been opened to question. With that background in mind, I'd like to briefly address some of the factual issues I expect you may want to ask me about, starting with my timeline in Ukraine and the events about which I do and do not have firsthand knowledge. I arrived in Ukraine on August 22nd, 2016, and left Ukraine permanently on May 20th, 2019. There are a number of events you are investigating to which I cannot bring any firsthand knowledge. The events that predated my Ukraine service include the release of the so-called Black Ledger and Mr. Manafort's subsequent resignation from President Trump's campaign, and the departure from office of former Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin. Several other events occurred after I returned from Ukraine. These include President Trump's July 25, 2019 call with President Zelensky, the discussions surrounding that phone call, and any discussions surrounding the delay of security assistance to Ukraine in the summer of 2019. As for events during my tenure in Ukraine, I want to reiterate first that the allegation that I disseminated a do not prosecute list was a fabrication. Mr. Lutsenko, the former Ukrainian prosecutor general who made that allegation, has acknowledged that the list never existed. I did not tell Mr. Lutsenko or other Ukrainian officials who they should or should not prosecute. Instead, I advocated the U.S. position that rule of law should prevail, and Ukrainian law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges should stop wielding their power selectively as a political weapon against their adversaries and start dealing with all consistently and according to the law. Also untrue are unsourced allegations that I told unidentified embassy employees or Ukrainian officials that President Trump's orders should be ignored because he was going to be impeached or for any other reason. I did not, and I would not say such a thing. Such statements would be inconsistent with my training as a Foreign Service officer and my role as an ambassador. The Obama administration did not ask me to help the Clinton campaign or harm the Trump campaign, nor would I have taken any such steps if they had. Partisanship of this type is not compatible with the role of a career Foreign Service officer. I have never met Hunter Biden, nor have I had any direct or indirect conversations with him. And although I have met former Vice President Biden several times over the course of our many years in government service, neither he nor the previous administration ever raised the issue of either Burisma or Hunter Biden with me. With respect to Mayor Giuliani, I have had only minimal contact with him, a total of 3, none related to the events at issue. I do not understand Mr. Giuliani's motives for attacking me, nor can I offer an opinion on whether he believed the allegations he spread about me. Clearly, no one at the State Department did. What I can say is that Mr. Giuliani should have known those claims were suspect, coming, as they reportedly did, from individuals with questionable motives and with reason to believe that their political and financial ambitions would be stymied by our anti-corruption policy in Ukraine. After being asked by the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs in early March 2019 to extend my tour until 2020, the smear campaign against me entered a new public phase in the United States. In the wake of the negative press, State Department officials suggested an earlier departure, and we agreed upon July 2019. I was then abruptly told, just weeks later in late April, to come back to Washington from Ukraine on the next plane. At the time I departed, Ukraine had just concluded game-changing presidential elections. It was a sensitive period with much at stake for the United States and called for all the experience and expertise we could muster. When I returned to the United States, Deputy Secretary of State Sullivan told me there had been a concerted campaign against me, that the President no longer wished me to serve as ambassador to Ukraine, and that, in fact, the President had been pushing for my removal since the prior summer. As Mr. Sullivan recently recounted during his Senate confirmation hearing, neither he nor anyone else ever explained or sought to justify the President's concerns about me, nor did anyone in the department justify my early departure by suggesting I had done something wrong. I appreciate that Mr. Sullivan publicly affirmed at his hearing that I had served capably and admirably. Although then and now I have always understood that I served at the pleasure of the President, I still find it difficult to comprehend that foreign and private interests were able to undermine U.S. interests in this way. Individuals who apparently felt stymied by our efforts to promote stated U.S. policy against corruption, that is, to do our mission, were able to successfully conduct a campaign of disinformation against a sitting ambassador using unofficial back channels. As various witnesses have recounted, They shared baseless allegations with the president and convinced him to remove his ambassador, despite the fact that the State Department fully understood that the allegations were false and the sources highly suspect. These events should concern everyone in this room. Ambassadors are the symbol of the United States abroad. They are the personal representative of the president. They should always act and speak with full authority to advocate for U.S. policies. If our chief representative is kneecapped, it limits our effectiveness to safeguard the vital national security interests of the United States. This is especially important now, when the international landscape is more complicated and more competitive than it has been since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Our Ukraine policy has been thrown into disarray, and shady interests the world over have learned how little it takes to remove an American ambassador who does not give them what they want. After these events, what foreign official, corrupt or not, could be blamed for wondering whether the U.S. ambassador represents the president's views? And what U.S. ambassador could be blamed for harboring the fear that they can't count on our government to support them as they implement stated U.S. policy and protect and defend U.S. interests? I'd like to comment on one other matter before taking your questions. At the closed deposition, I expressed grave concerns about the degradation of the Foreign Service over the past few years and the failure of State Department leadership to push back as foreign and corrupt interests apparently hijacked our Ukraine policy. I remain disappointed that the department's leadership and others have declined to acknowledge that the attacks against me and others are dangerously wrong. This is about far, far more than me or a couple of individuals. As Foreign Service professionals are being denigrated and undermined, the institution is also being degraded. This will soon cause real harm if it hasn't already. The State Department, as a tool of foreign policy, often doesn't get the same kind of attention or even respect as the military might of the Pentagon. But we are, as they say, the pointy end of the spear. If we lose our edge, the U.S. will inevitably have to use other tools, even more than it does today. And those other tools are blunter, more expensive, and not universally effective. Moreover, the attacks are leading to a crisis in the State Department as the policy process is visibly unraveling. Leadership vacancies go unfilled, and senior and mid-level officers ponder an uncertain future. The crisis has moved from the impact on individuals to an impact on the institution itself. The State Department is being hollowed out from within at a competitive and complex time on the world stage. This is not a time to undercut our diplomats. It is the responsibility of the department's leaders to stand up for the institution and the individuals who make that institution, still today, the most effective diplomatic force in the world. And Congress has a responsibility to reinvest in our diplomacy. That's an investment in our national security. It's an investment in our future, in our children's future. As I close, let me be clear on who we are and how we serve this country. We are professionals, we are public servants who by vocation and training pursue the policies of the president, regardless of who holds that office or what party they affiliate with. We handle American citizen services, facilitate trade and commerce, work security issues, represent the U.S., and report to and advise Washington, to mention just some of our functions. And we make a difference every day. We are people who repeatedly uproot our lives, who risk and sometimes give our lives for this country. We are the 52 Americans who 40 years ago this month began 444 days of deprivation, torture, and captivity in Tehran. We are the dozens of Americans stationed at our embassy in Cuba and consulates in China who mysteriously and dangerously, and in some cases perhaps even permanently, were injured and attacked from unknown sources several years ago. And we are Ambassador Chris Stevens, Sean Patrick Smith, Ty Woods, and Glenn Doherty, people rightly called heroes for their ultimate sacrifice to this nation's foreign policy interests in Libya 8 years ago. We honor these individuals. They represent each one of you here and every American. These courageous individuals were attacked because they symbolized America. What you need to know, what Americans need to know, is that while thankfully most of us answer the call to duty in far less dramatic ways, every Foreign Service officer runs the same risks, and very often so do our families. They serve too. As individuals, as a community, we answer the call to duty to advance and protect the interests of the United States. We take our oath seriously, the same oath that each one of you take, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. I count myself lucky to be a Foreign Service officer, fortunate to serve with the best America has to offer, blessed to serve the American people for the last 33 years. I thank you for your attention. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador. We count ourselves lucky to have you serve the country as you have for decades. We'll now move to the 45-minute rounds. I recognize myself and Majority Counsel for 45 minutes. Marie Yovanovitch, thank you again for appearing today. All Americans are deeply in your debt. Before I hand it over to Mr. Goldman, our staff counsel, I want to ask you about a few of the pivotal events of interest to the country. First of all, was fighting corruption in Ukraine a key element of U.S. policy and one on which you placed the highest priority?
Yes, it was.
And can you explain why?
It was important, and it was actually stated in our policy and in our strategy. It was important because corruption was undermining the integrity of the governance system in Ukraine. And as I noted in my statement, countries that have leaders that are honest and trustworthy make better partners for us. Countries where there is a level playing field for our U.S. business makes it easier for our companies to do business there, to trade, and to profit in those countries. And what had been happening since the Soviet Union, if this is very much a Soviet legacy, is that corrupt interests were undermining not only the governance but also the economy of Ukraine. We see enormous potential in Ukraine and would like to have a more capable, more trustworthy partner there.
And I know this may be awkward for you to answer since it's a question about yourself and your reputation, but is it fair to say that you earned a reputation for being a champion of anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine?
Yes. Yes.
I don't know if you had a chance to watch George Kent's testimony yesterday, but would you agree with his rather frank assessment that if you fight corruption, you're going to piss off some corrupt people?
Yes.
And in your efforts fighting corruption to advance U.S. policy interests, did you anger some of the corrupt leaders in Ukraine?
Yes.
Was one of those corrupt people Prosecutor General Yuri Lutsenko?
Yes, I believe so.
Was another one of those corrupt people Lutsenko's predecessor, another corrupt Prosecutor General named Viktor Shokin?
Apparently so, although I've never met him.
At some point, did you come to learn that both Lutsenko and Shokin were in touch with Rudy Giuliani, President Trump's lawyer and representative?
Yes.
In fact, did Giuliani try to overturn a decision that you participated in to deny Shokin a visa?
Yes, that is what I was told.
And that denial was based on Mr. Shokin's corruption?
Yes, that's true.
And was it Mr. Lutsenko, among others, who coordinated with Mr. Giuliani to peddle false accusations against you as well as the Bidens?
Yes, that is my understanding.
And were these smears also amplified by the President's son, Donald Trump Jr., as well as certain hosts on Fox?
Yes, yes, that is the case.
In the face of this smear campaign, did colleagues at the State Department try to get a statement of support for you from Secretary Pompeo?
Yes.
Were they successful?
No.
Did you come to learn that they couldn't issue such a statement because they feared it would be undercut by the president?
Yes.
And then were you told that though you had done nothing wrong, you did not enjoy the confidence of the president and could no longer serve as ambassador?
Yes, that is correct.
And in fact, you flew home from Kiev on the same day as the inauguration of Ukraine's new president?
That's true.
That inauguration was attended by three who have become known as the Three Amigos, Ambassadors Sondland, Volker, and Perry, was it?
Yes.
And 3 days after that inauguration, in a meeting with President Trump, are you aware that the president designated these Three Amigos to coordinate Ukraine policy with Rudy Giuliani?
Since then, I have become aware of that.
This is the same Rudy Giuliani who orchestrated the smear campaign against you?
Yes.
And the same Rudy Giuliani who, during the now infamous July 25th phone call, the president recommended to Zelensky in the context of the two investigations the president wanted into the 2016 election and the Bidens?
Yes.
And finally, Ambassador, in that July 25th phone call, the president praises one of these corrupt former Ukrainian prosecutors and says they were treated very unfairly. They were treated unfairly. Not you, who was smeared and recalled, but one of them. What message does that send to your colleagues in the U.S. Embassy in Kiev?
I'm just not sure what the basis for that kind of a statement would be. Certainly not from our reporting over years.
Did you have concern, though, or do you have concern today about what message the president's action sends to the people who are still in Ukraine representing the United States when a well-respected ambassador can be smeared out of her post with the participation and acquiescence of the President of the United States?
Well, it's, I think, been a big hit for morale, both at the U.S. Embassy Kyiv, but also more broadly in the State Department.
Is it fair to say that other ambassadors and others of lesser rank who serve the United States and embassies around the world might look at this and think, if I take on corrupt people in these countries, that could happen to me?
I think that's a fair statement, yes.
Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Yovanovitch, on April 24th of this year, at approximately 10 p.m., you received a telephone call while you were at the embassy in Kyiv from the Director General of the State Department. This was just 3 days after President Zelensky's election and the call between President Trump and President Zelensky that we just heard from Ranking Member Nunes. At the time that this urgent call came in, what were you in the middle of doing?
I was hosting an event in honor of Katya Handzuk, who is an anti-corruption activist, or was an anti-corruption activist in Ukraine. We had given her the Woman of Courage Award from Ukraine, and in fact, the worldwide Woman of Courage event, at the worldwide Women of Courage event in Washington, D.C., Secretary Pompeo singled her out for her amazing work in Ukraine to fight corrupt interests in the south of Ukraine. She very tragically died because she was attacked by acid, and several months later died a very, very painful death. We thought it was important that justice be done for Katya Handzuk and for others who fight corruption in Ukraine, because it's not a, kind of a tabletop exercise there. Lives are in the balance. And so we wanted to bring attention to this. We held an event and gave her father, who of course is still mourning her, that award, the Women of Courage event.
And her Women of Courage Award stemmed from her anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine?
Yes, that is true.
Was it ever determined who threw the acid and killed her?
There have been investigations, but while some of the lower-ranking individuals that were involved in this have been arrested. Those who ordered this have not yet been apprehended.
After you stepped away from this anti-corruption event to take this call, what did the Director General tell you?
She said that there was great concern on the 7th floor of the State Department. That's where the leadership of the State Department sits. There was great concern. They were worried. She just wanted to give me a heads up about this. And, you know, things seemed to be going on. And so she just wanted to give me a heads up. You know, it's hard to know how to react to something like that. I asked her what it was about. What did she think it was about? She didn't know. She said that she was going to try and find out more, but she had wanted to give me a heads up. In fact, I think she may even have been instructed to give me a heads up on that. And so I asked her, you know, kind of what is the next step here? So she said she would try to find out more, and she would try to call me by midnight.
What happened next?
Around 1 o'clock in the morning, she called me again, and she said that there were great concerns. There were concerns up the street, and she said I needed to get on come home immediately, get on the next plane to the U.S. And I asked her why, and she said she wasn't sure, but there were concerns about my security. I asked her my physical security, because sometimes Washington knows more than we do about these things, and she said no, she hadn't gotten that impression that it was a physical security issue, but they were concerned about my security, and I needed to come home right away. You know, I argued this is extremely irregular, and no reason given. But in the end, I did get on the next plane home.
You said there were concerns up the street. What did you understand that to mean?
The White House.
Did she explain in any more detail what she meant by concerns about your security?
No, she didn't. I did specifically ask whether this had to do with Mayor Giuliani's allegations against me and so forth, and she said she didn't know. It didn't even actually appear to me that she seemed to be aware of that. No reason was offered.
Did she explain what the urgency was for you to come back on the next flight?
The only thing that's pertinent to that was that when she said that there were concerns about my security. That's all. But it was not further explained.
Now, prior to this abrupt callback to Washington, D.C., had you been offered an extension of your post by the State Department?
Yes. The Undersecretary for Political Affairs had asked whether I would extend for another year, departing in July of 2020.
When was that request made?
In early March.
So about a month and a half before this call?
Yes.
Did anyone at the State Department ever express concerns about your job performance?
No.
Now, after you returned to Washington a couple days after that, you met with the Deputy Secretary of State. And at your deposition, you said that the Deputy Secretary of State told you that you had done nothing wrong, but that there was a concerted campaign against you. What did he mean by that?
I'm not exactly sure, but I took it to mean that the allegations that Mayor Giuliani and others were putting out there, that's what it was.
And who else was involved in this concerted campaign against you?
There were some members of the press and others in Mayor Giuliani's circle.
And who from Ukraine?
In Ukraine, I think, well, Mr. Lutsenko, the prosecutor general, and Mr. Shokin, his predecessor, certainly.
And at this time, Mr. Lutsenko was the lead prosecutor general, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And had President Zelensky indicated whether or not he was going to keep him on after the election?
He had indicated he would not be keeping on Mr. Lutsenko.
And I believe you testified earlier that Mr. Lutsenko had a reputation for being corrupt, is that right?
That's correct.
Now, during this conversation, did the Deputy Secretary tell you about your future as the ambassador to Ukraine?
Well, he told me I needed to leave.
What did he say?
He said that, there was a lot of back and forth, but ultimately he said the words that, every Foreign Service officer understands: the president has lost confidence in you. That was, a terrible thing to hear. And I said, well, I guess I have to go then. But no real reason was offered as to why I had to leave and why it was being done in such a manner.
Did you have any indication that the State Department had lost confidence in you?
No.
And were you provided any reason why the president lost confidence in you?
No.
Now, you testified at your deposition that you were told at some point that Secretary Pompeo had tried to protect you, but that he was no longer able to do that. Were you aware of these efforts to protect you?
No, I was not until that meeting with Deputy Secretary Sullivan.
And did you understand who he was trying to protect you from?
Well, my understanding was that the president had wanted me to leave, and there was some discussion about that over the prior months.
Did you have any understanding why Secretary Pompeo was no longer able to protect you?
No, it was just a statement made that he was no longer able to protect me.
So just like that, you had to leave Ukraine as soon as possible?
Yes.
How did that make you feel?
Terrible, honestly. After 33 years of service to our country, it was terrible. It's not the way I wanted my career to end.
Now, you also told this Deputy Secretary that this was a dangerous precedent. What did you mean by that?
I was worried about our policy, but also personnel. And I asked him, how are you going to explain this to people in the State Department, the press, the public, Ukrainians, because everybody is watching. And so if people see somebody who, and of course it had been very public, frankly, the attacks on me by Mayor Giuliani and others, and Mr. Lutsenko in Ukraine, if people see that I, who have been, promoting our policies on anti-corruption, if they can undermine me and get me pulled out of Ukraine, what does that mean for our policy? Do we still have that same policy? How are we going to affirmatively put that forward, number one? Number two, when other countries, other actors in other countries see that private interests, foreign interests can come together and get a U.S. ambassador removed, what's going to stop them from doing that in the future in other countries? Often the work we do, we try to be diplomatic about it, but as Deputy Assistant Secretary George Kent said, sometimes we get people really angry with us. It's uncomfortable. And we are doing our jobs, but sometimes people become very angry with us. And if they realize that they can just remove us, they're going to do that.
How did the Deputy Secretary respond?
He said those were good questions, and he would get back to me.
Did he ever get back to you?
He asked to see me the following day.
What did he say to you then?
The conversation was more, again, I'm grateful for this, but really more to see how I was doing, and what would I do next, how could he help?
But he didn't address the dangerous precedent that you flagged for him?
No.
Now, you understood, of course, that the President of the United States could remove you and that you served at the pleasure of the President. Is that right?
That's right.
But in your 33 years as a Foreign Service officer, have you ever heard of a President of the United States recalling another ambassador without cause based on allegations that the State Department itself knew to be false?
No.
Now, you testified in your opening statement that you had left Ukraine by the time of the July 25th call between President Trump and President Zelensky. When was the first time that you saw the call record for this phone call?
When it was released publicly at the end of September, I believe.
And prior to reading that call record, were you aware that President Trump had specifically made reference to you in that call?
No.
What was your reaction to learning that?
I was shocked, absolutely shocked, and devastated, frankly.
What do you mean by devastated?
I was shocked and devastated that I would feature in a phone call between two heads of state in such a manner where President Trump said that I was bad news to another world leader and that I would be going through some things. So it was a terrible moment. A person who saw me actually reading the transcript said that the color drained from my face. I think I even had a physical reaction. I think, even now, words kind of fail me.
Well, without upsetting you too much, I'd like to show you the excerpts from the call. And the first one, where President Trump says that the former ambassador from the United States, the woman, was bad news, and the people she was dealing with in the Ukraine were bad news. So I just want to let you know. What was your reaction when you heard the President of the United States refer to you as bad news?
I couldn't believe it. I mean, again, shocked, appalled, devastated that the President of the United States would talk about any ambassador like that to a foreign head of state. And it was me. I mean, I couldn't believe it.
The next excerpt, when the President references you, was a short one. But he said, well, she's going to go through some things. What did you think when President Trump told President Zelensky and you read that you were going to go through some things?
I didn't know what to think, but I was very concerned.
What were you concerned about?
She's going to go through some things. It didn't sound good. It sounded like a threat.
Did you feel threatened?
I did.
How so?
I didn't know exactly. It's not, a very precise phrase, but I think it didn't feel like I was. I really don't know how to answer the question any further, except to say that it kind of felt like a vague threat, and so I wondered what that meant. It concerned me.
Now, in this same call where the President, as you just said, threatens you to a foreign leader, he also praises the corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor who led the false smear campaign against you. I want to show you another excerpt or two from the transcript, or the call record rather, where the President of the United States says, good, because I heard you had a prosecutor who was very good and he was shut down, and that's really unfair. A lot of people are talking about that. The way they shut your very good prosecutor down, and you had some very bad people involved. And he went on later to say, I heard the prosecutor was treated very badly, and he was a very fair prosecutor, so good luck with everything. Now, Ambassador Yovanovitch, after nearly 3 years in Ukraine where you tried to clean up the Prosecutor General's office, was it the U.S. Embassy's view that the former Prosecutor General was a very good and very fair prosecutor?
No, it was not.
In fact, he was rather corrupt, is that right?
It wasn't certainly based on anything that That was the State Department would have reported, or frankly, anybody
The
else
Prosecutor
in the US
General's
government.
office is a long-running problem in
Interagency
Ukraine, is that right?
consensus that while
So how did you feel when you heard President Trump
very hopeful
speak so
that he would
highly of
actually
the
do
corrupt
things that
Ukrainian
he said he would
prosecutor
set out to
who
do, including
helped
reforming
to
the
execute the
Prosecutor
smear
General's office,
campaign to have
but
you
that did
removed?
not materialize.
So this was not the uniform
was-
position of
It was
the
disappointing.
official
It was
U.S.
concerning.
policymakers. Is that right?
It wasn't certainly based on anything that
Now
the
let's
State
go back
Department
to
would have
the
reported, or frankly, anybody else
smear
in the U.S.
campaign
government.
that you referenced,
There was
and in March when you
interagency
said it became
consensus
public.
that while
And you previously
when Mr.
testified
Lutsenko
that
came
you
into
had learned
office,
that
we were
Marie
very
Yovanovitch,
hopeful that
President
he would
Trump's
actually do
lawyer
the
and
things that he said he
representative,
would set out to
who was
do,
also
including
mentioned in that July
reforming the
25th
Prosecutor
call,
General's office.
was in regular
but that did not
communication with the
materialize.
corrupt Prosecutor General. So this was not the late uniform 2018 position and early of 2019 the official U.S. And at one point in your deposition,
right?
you said that they,
Right.
that being Giuliani and the corrupt former
Now let's go back to
Prosecutor
the
General, had
smear
plans to,
campaign
quote,
that you
do
referenced,
things to me.
and in March when you said
What
it
did you
became
mean by
public.
that?
And you previously
I
testified
didn't really
that you
know,
had
but that's
learned
what I
that
had
Rudy
been told by
Giuliani,
Ukrainian
President
officials.
Trump's lawyer and representative, who was also
Did you subsequently
mentioned in that
understand
July 25th
a little
call,
bit more what that meant?
was in regular
Well,
communication
now,
with the
advantage
corrupt
of
Prosecutor
hindsight,
General
I think that meant removing me from
in
my
late
job in
2018 and early
Who did you
2019.
understand to be working with
And at one point in
Mr.
your
Giuliani
deposition, you said that
as
they,
his
that being
associates in
Giuliani
Ukraine?
and the corrupt foreign Prosecutor General,
Well,
had plans
certainly,
to,
Mr.
quote,
Lutsenko,
do
Mr.
things to me.
Shokin,
What did you mean by that?
I believe that there were also
I didn't
Ukrainian
really know,
Americans,
but that's
Mr.
what I had been
Parnas
told
and Mr.
by
Freeman, who
Ukrainian
have recently been indicted.
Those are the
Did
two
you
who have been
subsequently
indicted
understand
in New York.
a little bit
Southern
more
District
what
of
that
New
meant?
York. Well, now with the advantage of hindsight,
Now,
I
at
think
the
that
end
meant
of
removing me from my
March,
job in
this
Ukraine.
Effort
Who did you
by
understand to
Giuliani
be
and his associates
working
resulted
with
in a series
Mr.
of
Giuliani
articles in
as
the
his
Hill
associates in Ukraine?
publication that were based on allegations in
well,
part
certainly,
from
Mr.
Lutsenko, the
Lutsenko,
corrupt
Mr. Shokin,
prosecutor general. And just to
I believe
summarize
that there were
some of these
also
allegations, there were,
Ukrainian Americans,
among
Mr.
others, three
Parnas and
different
Mr. Freeman, who have
categories.
recently been indicted.
One category included
Those are the two
attacks
who have
against
been
you,
indicted in New York.
which you referenced in your
District of New
opening
York.
statement, including that you had badmouthed the president
Now, at the end
and
of
had given the
March,
prosecutor
this
general a do not prosecute
effort by
list.
Giuliani and his
There was
associates
another that
resulted in
included
a series
allegations
of
of
articles
Ukrainian
in the
interference
Hill
in the 2016
publication
election.
that were
And then there was a
based
third
on
that
allegations
related
in part
to
from
allegations concerning
Lutsenko, the corrupt
Burisma and the
prosecutor
Bidens.
general.
Is that accurate?
And just to summarize some of these allegations,
Yes.
there were, among
Were
others,
these
three
articles
different
and
categories.
allegations then promoted by
One category
others
included the
associated with the
attacks against
president
you,
in the United States?
which you referenced in your opening statement, including that you had badmouthed the
They seem to be
president
promoted by
and had given
those
the
around,
prosecutor general a
Mayor
do not
Giuliani.
prosecute list.
I'm going to show
There was
you
another
a
that
couple
included
of
allegations of Ukrainian
exhibits, including
interference
a
in the
tweet
2016
here by
election.
President Trump himself.
And then
on
there
March
was a
20th,
third
which
that
was the
related
first day
to
that,
allegations concerning
one of these
Burisma
articles
and
was
Bidens.
published.
Is that
It
accurate?
appears to be a
Yes.
quote
Were these articles
that says
and
John
allegations
Solomon,
then
who's the author
promoted
of
by
the articles,
others associated
as
with the
Russia
president
collusion
in the United
fades,
States?
Ukrainian plot to help Clinton emerges, unquote,
They seem to be promoted
at Sean
by
Hannity
those
at
around
Fox News.
Mayor Giuliani.
And then if I could go to another tweet,
I'm going to show
4
you a
days
couple
later,
of
this is the
exhibits,
president's
including
son,
a tweet
Donald Trump
here
Jr.,
by President Trump
who
himself on
tweets,
March
"We
20th,
need more
which was the
at
first
Richard
day that
Grenell's, who's
one of
the
these
ambassador to
articles
Germany,
was
is that right?
published.
That's correct.
It appears
and
to
less
be
of these
a
jokers as ambassadors.
quote
and
that
it's a
says John
retweet
Solomon
of
is the
one of
author
John
of the
Solomon's
articles.
articles,
As
or
Russia
an article
collusion
referencing
fades,
the
Ukrainian
allegations
plot
that says
to help
calls
Clinton
grow
emerges,
to remove Obama's
unquote,
U.S. ambassador
at
to
Sean
Ukraine.
Hannity at Fox News.
Were you aware of these tweets
Then if
at
I
the
could
time?
go to another tweet 4 days later.
What was your reaction to seeing this?
This is the
Well, I was
president's
worried.
son, Donald Trump Jr.
What were you worried about?
Who tweets, "We need more at Richard
That this didn't
Grenell's,"
seem,
who's
these
the
attacks
ambassador to Germany, is that
were,
right?
That's correct.
And less of
being
these
repeated by the
jokers
president
as
himself
ambassadors.
and his son.
And it's a retweet of one
Were
of
you
John
aware whether
Solomon's
they
articles
received attention
or
on
an article referencing the
primetime
allegations
television
that
that
says
says
Fox
calls
News as
grow
well?
to remove Obama's U.S. ambassador
Now,
to
was the
Ukraine.
allegation that you were bad?
Were you aware of
President
these
Trump
tweets at the time?
true?
Yes.
What was your
Was
reaction?
the
allegation
allegation
that you had
Well, I was worried.
created
What were you
a do
worried
not
about?
prosecute list to give to the prosecutor general
That
in Ukraine
this didn't seem,
true?
these attacks were
In fact, didn't the corrupt prosecutor general himself later recant those allegations?
And his son.
And were you aware
when
whether
these articles
they
were first published, did the
received
State
attention
Department
on
issue a response?
primetime television on Fox News as well?
As you said, there was a series
Now,
of
was
articles.
the allegation
So
that you
after
were
the first
bad-mouthing
article,
President Trump
which was
true?
an interview with Mr. Lutsenko,
Was the allegation that
and
you
was
had
only, really about
created
me
a
and
do not
based on
prosecute
allegations
list to
about
give
me.
to the
State
prosecutor general in
Department came out
Ukraine
the following day
true?
with a very strong statement.
In fact, didn't the corrupt prosecutor general
saying that,
himself later
these
recant those
allegations were
allegations?
fabrications. Yes.
So the statement addressed the
Now, when these articles were first
falsity of
published,
the
did the
allegations
State Department
themselves.
issue a response?
Yes.
It didn't say anything about your job performance in any way?
Honestly, I haven't looked at it in a very long time. I think it was generally probably laudatory, but I can't recall.
Did anyone in the State Department raise any concerns with you or express any belief in these allegations?
No. I mean, people thought it was ridiculous.
Now, after these false allegations were made against you, did you have any discussions with anyone in leadership in the State Department about a potential statement of support from the department or the secretary himself?
Yes. After the tweets that you just showed us, I mean, it seemed to me that if the president's son is saying things like this, that it would be very hard to continue in my position and have authority in Ukraine unless the State Department came out pretty strongly behind me. And so, over over the weekend of like March 22nd, I think that's about the date, there was a lot of discussion on email among a number of people about what could be done. I and the Undersecretary for Political Affairs called me on Sunday, and I said, it's really important that the Secretary himself come out and be supportive, because otherwise it's hard for me to be the kind of representative you need here. And he said he would talk to the Secretary. I mean, that's my recollection of the call. That may not be exactly how it played out, but that was my recollection.
This is David Hale, the Undersecretary of Political Affairs, who's the #3 person at the State Department?
Yes.
Did he indicate to you that he supported such a statement of support for you?
I think he must have, because I don't think he would have gone to the Secretary if he didn't support it. I mean, you wouldn't bring a bad idea to the Secretary of State.
Your general understanding is that you did have the full support of the State Department, is that right?
Yes.
And in fact, during your 33-year career as a Foreign Service officer, did you ever hear of any serious concerns about your job performance?
No.
Was this statement of support ultimately issued for you?
No, it was not.
Did you learn why not?
Yeah, yes. I was told that there was a concern on the 7th floor that if a statement of support was issued, whether by the State Department or by the Secretary personally, that it could be undermined.
How could it be undermined?
That the President might issue a tweet contradicting that or something to that effect.
So let me see if I get this right. You were one of the most senior diplomats in the State Department. You've been there for 33 years. You'd won numerous awards. You've been appointed as an ambassador 3 times by both Republican and Democratic presidents. And the State Department would not issue a statement in support of you against false allegations because they were concerned about a tweet from the President of the United States?
That's my understanding.
Mr. Woman, if I could follow up on that question, it seems like an appropriate time. Marie Yovanovitch, as we sit here testifying, the President is attacking you on Twitter. And I'd like to give you a chance to respond. I'll read part of one of his tweets. Everywhere Marie Yovanovitch went turned bad. She started off in Somalia. How did that go? He goes on to say, later in the tweet, is a U.S. president's absolute right to appoint ambassadors. First of all, Ambassador Yovanovitch, the Senate has a chance to confirm or deny an ambassador, do they not?
Yes, advise and consent.
But would you like to respond to the president's attack that everywhere you went turned bad?
Well, I don't think I have such powers, not in Mogadishu, Somalia, and not in other places. I actually think that where I've served over the years, I and others have demonstrably made things better, for the U.S. as well as for the countries that I've served in. Ukraine, for example, where there are huge challenges, including, on the issue that we're discussing today of corruption. Huge challenges, but they've made a lot of progress since 2014, including in the years that I was there. And I think in part, the Ukrainian people get the most credit for that. But a part of that credit goes to the work of the United States and to me as the ambassador in Ukraine.
Ambassador, you've shown the courage to come forward today and testify. Notwithstanding the fact you were urged by the White House or State Department not to, notwithstanding the fact that, as you testified earlier, the president implicitly threatened you in that call record, and now the president in real time is attacking you. What effect do you think that has on other witnesses' willingness to come forward and expose wrongdoing?
Well, it's very intimidating.
It's designed to intimidate, is it not?
I can't speak to what the president is trying to do, but I think the effect is to be intimidating.
Well, I want to let you know, Ambassador, that some of us here take witness intimidation very, very seriously. Mr. Goldman.
Ambassador Yovanovitch, you indicated that those same articles in March that included the smear campaign also included allegations related to Ukraine's interference in the 2016 election and the Burisma-Biden connection. Is that right?
Yes.
So I'm going to end my questioning where we were before, which was the July 25th call. And President Trump not only insults you and praises the corrupt prosecutor general, but he also, as you know by now, references these two investigations. First, immediately after President Zelensky thanks President Trump for his, quote, great support in the area of defense, unquote, President Trump responds, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. And then he goes on in that same paragraph to say, whatever you can do, it's very important that you do it if that's possible. Now, Ambassador Yovanovitch, from your experience as the ambassador in Ukraine for almost 3 years, and understanding that President Zelensky was not in politics before he ran for president and was a new president on this call, how would you expect President Zelensky to interpret a request for a favor?
The U.S. Relationship for Ukraine is the single most important relationship. And so I think that President Zelensky, any president, would do what they could to lean in on a favor request. I'm not saying that that's a yes. I'm saying they would try to lean in and see what they could do.
Fair to say that a president of Ukraine that is so dependent on the United States would do just about anything within his power to please the President of the United States, if he could?
If he could. I mean, I'm sure there are limits, and I understand there were a lot of discussions in the Ukrainian government about all of this. But yeah, I mean, we are an important relationship on the security side and on the political side. And so the president of Ukraine, one of the most important functions that individual has is to make sure the relationship with the U.S. is rock solid.
Now, are you familiar with these allegations of Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election?
I mean, there have been rumors out there about things like that, but, there was nothing hard, at least nothing that I was aware of.
There was nothing based in fact to support these allegations?
Yes.
And, in fact, who was responsible for interfering and meddling in the 2016 election?
Well, the U.S. intelligence community has concluded that it was Russia.
Ambassador Yovanovitch, are you aware that in February of 2017, Vladimir Putin himself promoted this theory of Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election?
Maybe I knew that once and have forgotten, but I'm not familiar with it now.
Well, let me show you a press statement that President Putin made in a joint press conference with Viktor Orban of Hungary on February 2nd of 2017, where he says, second, as we all know, during the presidential campaign in the United States, the Ukrainian government adopted a unilateral position in favor of one candidate. More than that, certain oligarchs, certainly with the approval of the political leadership, funded this candidate, or female candidate, to be more precise. Now, how would this theory of Ukraine interference in the 2016 election be in Vladimir Putin's interest?
Well, President Putin must have been aware that there were concerns in the U.S. about Russian meddling in the 2016 elections and what the potential was for Russian meddling in the future. Classic for an intelligence officer to try to throw off the scent and create an alternative narrative that maybe might get picked up and get some credence.
An alternative narrative that would absolve his own wrongdoing?
Yeah.
And when he talks about an oligarch, and he talks about the support of the Ukrainian government, there's also a reference in the July 25th call to a wealthy Ukrainian. Is it your understanding that what Vladimir Putin is saying here in this press statement in February 2017 is similar to what President Trump says on the July 25th call related to the 2016 election?
Maybe.
Now let me show you another exhibit from the call related to the Bidens, which I'm sure you're familiar with. President Trump says the other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. Now, are you familiar with these allegations related to Vice President Biden?
Yes.
Do you know whether he ever went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution of anyone?
No.
And in fact, when Vice President Biden acted to remove the former corrupt prosecutor in Ukraine, did he do so as part of official United States policy?
Official U.S. policy.
And that was
endorsed and was the policy of a number of other international stakeholders, other countries, other monetary institutions, financial institutions.
And in fact, if he helped to remove a corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor general who was not prosecuting enough corruption, that would increase the chances that corrupt companies in Ukraine would be investigated. Isn't that right?
One would think so.
And that could include Burisma, right?
Yes.
Now, at the time of this call, Vice President Biden was the front runner for the Democratic nomination for president and President Trump's potential next opponent in the election. Is it your understanding that President Trump's request to have Vice President Biden investigated, was that part of official U.S. policy as you knew it?
Well, I should say that I had, at the time of this phone call, I had already departed Ukraine 2 months prior.
Right, but you're familiar with, it didn't change that much in 2 months, right?
It certainly would not have been the policy in May when I left.
And were these two investigations part of the anti-corruption platform that you championed in Ukraine for 3 years?
No.
And these investigations, do they appear to you to be to benefit the president's personal and political interests rather than the national interest?
Well, they certainly could.
Now, just returning to the allegations in the Hill publication in March that were promoted by Mr. Giuliani, the president's lawyer, were those two allegations similar to the two allegations that the president wanted President Zelensky to investigate?
Yes.
So ultimately, in the July 25th phone call with the Ukrainian president, the President of the United States endorsed the false allegations against you and the Bidens. Is that right?
Yes.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I have a parliamentary inquiry, please.
The gentleman will suspend. Votes are fairly imminent. We're going to take a brief recess. I would ask everyone to remain seated to allow the witness to exit the room, and we will resume after votes.
Mr. Chairman, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman can seek recognition after we resume.
And we have just heard some stunning testimony from Ambassador Yovanovitch, who was recalled from Ukraine by the President of the United States and the State Department after what she alleges was a smear campaign waged against her by Rudy Giuliani. She said, in fact, that her tenure, she was kneecapped. Those are her words, which she said limits the ability to safeguard vital U.S. national security. She said it was done by others who tried to hijack our Ukraine policy. And then she goes on, while she was questioned, to describe what it was like to learn that the President of the United States was discussing her in a phone call with the new leader of Ukraine. She says she was shocked and she was devastated. She couldn't believe it, and then in fact she had a physical reaction that the color, as she said, drained from her face, as someone who was watching her while she read that. I want to bring in Margaret Brennan, who of course covers the State Department and is the moderator of Face the Nation. Those things I've just laid out, also in that July 25th call summary, which the President has described that call as perfect and has been released. We also learn that he says about Ambassador Yovanovitch, quote, she's going to go through some things. And Ambassador Yovanovitch said it sounded like a threat. The President at this hour also tweeting about Ambassador Yovanovitch, accusing her of doing some bad things. The question is whether she's being a witness before the United States Congress, a current diplomat of the United States government who started serving under Ronald Reagan, whether that is intimidation. And she said, quote, it is very intimidating. Is that one of the headlines, that a career diplomat is being threatened by the commander-in-chief?
Well, that the president is certainly not helping his own case here, because that July 25th call that you just pointed out, it sounded like a threat, and then to have him in real time tweet about her and in fact sort of blame her for all sorts of different problems. She said the effect is intimidating, and Adam Schiff, the chairman, of course, saying we take that seriously. But this gets to that chilling effect that was felt throughout the State Department when they watched someone. I mean, she is one of America's most experienced ambassadors, highest-ranking female, one of the highest-ranking female ambassadors. When something like this happens to someone of that rank, what does it do to the rank and file? And that's something that she also tried to illustrate there. And this is something that even just this week we saw with an Inspector General report that came out that revealed targeting by Trump administration officials of other State Department employees because of their ethnic background or perceived political bias. So she is digging into something that is a theme that the Trump administration has been accused of, and then had the President of the United States essentially make that argument in some ways for her.
I want to dig back into the details in just a second, but pull back so everyone, what is the effect of essentially a crackdown or a smear campaign being waged about the official diplomat that's been assigned to Ukraine? What, in effect, is happening to Russia at this point? Does Russia grow stronger? Does their influence grow? Does the crackdown on corruption weaken there in Ukraine?
Yes, is the short answer. And that was part of what the counsel there, Goldman, was trying to make clear to viewers, that Vladimir Putin has a vested interest in keeping those leaders in Ukraine aligned with him in power versus those favored by the West. That's why you're hearing this discussion of prosecutors in that country who are, helping to fight corruption or complicit in it. And what you heard the ambassador describe was that someone extremely close to the President of the United States, Rudy Giuliani, was in fact in business and very close to and talking to some of these corrupt officials that she was trying to push and crack down on for their corrupt activity. So by encouraging the corruption, it only encourages the interests of America's enemies like Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm. Margaret, all right, stand by, who's with me. I want to go to Nancy Cordes, who covers Capitol Hill and has followed every little detail of this impeachment inquiry. This was quite a case that was laid out about Ambassador Yovanovitch, about why she was removed, and in her words, what she called this concerted campaign by a close ally of the president to smear her.
Nora, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this at a hearing in my 11 years of covering Capitol Hill. A U.S. ambassador with an unblemished record built up over decades, basically describing how she was taken down by forces here in the U.S., apparently with the backing of the President of the United States. She even talked about the fact that when she was recalled and multiple individuals urged the Secretary of State to put out some kind of statement supporting her, she was told that while she had done nothing wrong, the decision had been made not to support her because they worried that the president might tweet something that contradicted that support. So she said she felt as if she had been hung out to dry, and she was even asked, Nora, if she knew of any other instance in her 33 years of another ambassador being sent home over allegations that the State Department knew were not true. She said she was not aware. She agreed that, of course, the president has the right to remove a U.S. ambassador at any point, but she had never seen another situation like this. So it was really a very devastating indictment that she herself sought to make bigger than just one individual. She talked about the fact that it has sent a chilling effect across embassies around the world, that other ambassadors might be afraid to tackle corruption because they too might be sent home, and that other diplomats who are in harm's way, serving at difficult posts around the world, might feel that they don't actually have the support of the State Department and the President of the United States. It was really remarkable.
I want to bring in Major Garrett as well, who has covered Congress for many years as well, and also has great sources with inside the White House. What do you make of the president tweeting about Ambassador Yovanovitch as she is testifying before Congress, and then the chairman of the committee giving her the opportunity to respond to it, which I think had to be one of the most breathtaking parts of this, where she describes essentially intimidation?
Exactly, Nora, and I can tell you that's not the script that the Republicans, looking at this hearing and planning for it, put forward to their own members. I was texting with a significant Republican in the leadership, and they had prepared a memo for the House Intelligence Committee Republicans. Look, this is a very tough witness. Don't badger her. Don't try to undercut her credibility. Just essentially go back to two main points. The president does have the power to recall you or to remove you for any reason or for no reason, and then you're not a fact witness to the July 25th call because you were removed a couple of months before that. Just stick with that. They knew that Ambassador Yovanovitch would come across as a credible witness, as someone who had served the country and had lots of dangerous posts and had always worked consistently with U.S. policy. Don't try, this memo said, to undercut her or badger her or put her on the spot. Just try to deal with the witness as it is, make those 2 points, and try to back off. And you can see in the opening statement of Representative Devin Nunes, the first Republican to talk, he didn't try to attack any of the underlying evidence he knew Ambassador Yovanovitch had already testified to. He talked about all sorts of other things. 2016, Ukraine this, that it's a star chamber for the Democrats, that they have Watergate fantasies, basically everything but what the witness in front of this committee was about to say. So the president jumping into this with a real-time tweet tells us 2 things. A, he's watching, meaning he's dignifying this process, figures out it's a threat, wants to engage, even though the very House Republicans he depends on to fortify his defense did not and were told not to go down that road.
To attack her.
Exactly.
And yet the president did. Got it.
Exactly.
I also want to talk about the political effect of it, the people involved in all of this, but very quickly again, because I do think the gravity of what we're learning and the effect on our U.S. foreign policy is so significant. And returning here to Margaret Brennan here, one of the things that the ambassador talked about is that she said the abrupt removal of a U.S. ambassador, as she was abruptly removed just after hosting a Women in Courage event for a woman who had been killed by acid in efforts to crack down on corruption pushed by the Russians. Ambassador Yovanovitch said today that her abrupt removal played into the hands of shady interests the world over, that those shady interests learned how little it takes to remove an American ambassador who does not give them what they want. What is the effect of that?
Exactly. She put that so clearly and succinctly there, the threat felt by doing something like this, that by spreading disinformation, by spreading lies, known falsehoods that the State Department at the very highest level said they knew were false, that you could remove someone who's not useful to you. If you are a Vladimir Putin, if you are an authoritarian leader in a country where you don't like what the American ambassador is telling you, you can get them removed.
Why would Vladimir Putin or oligarchs who support Vladimir Putin not want Marie Yovanovitch serving as ambassador?
Well, as she tells it, as she's been described, she's been extremely tough in anti-corruption. But specific to her case, and as the Journal, I think, first reported, these 2 individuals linked to Rudy Giuliani, Igor Fruman and Lev Parnas, had business interests that were not served by what the ambassador was doing, that they felt that she was getting in the way of certain things. These are allegations that have been made, but that there were business interests that weren't served by her cracking down on some of these
2
people.
individuals who have met with President Trump some 10 times, as has been reported, although President Trump has said he doesn't know who they are.
That's right. And these 2 individuals who have business interests with the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who had his own business interests in Ukraine. He was making a lot of money there. And so it's ironic in this when we talk about, and the president and his allies talk about the need to crack down on corruption, that there was the appearance of emboldening and enabling it by removing this ambassador.
I mean, I ask these questions because I think motive is important. I sort of wonder why the president of the United States would be concerned about the ambassador to Ukraine. There are so many ambassadors. They're career Foreign Service officials. Some other, ambassadors are appointed who have helped raise money for the president, like Ambassador Sondland. But in this case, this is a Foreign Service official who serves Republicans and Democrats and carries out no matter what president's foreign policy is.
And he or she wouldn't normally be on the president's radar. But what is so interesting?
Yeah, that's why I can't understand. Why was she on President Trump's radar?
And that is part of the case the Democrats are trying to lay out. It's a key question, and part of it is she describes there as also the president not listening to what official policy is and not listening to national security officials, but rather individuals that he personally has a relationship with, like Rudy Giuliani. So if Rudy Giuliani or other allies are telling him one thing about the U.S. ambassador, that she's getting in the way, that she's not loyal, that he will listen to them versus her looking at her public service record and listening to what the State Department is saying. So it's a pattern of behavior that Democrats are also trying to point to make their case here.
Thank you, Margaret. We've got reporters covering this all over Washington in every detail. Want to bring in Ed O'Keefe, who is also on Capitol Hill, who has covered the federal workforce and congressional hearings for several years. You know about these career diplomats. You've covered Congress as well. Have you ever heard such a strong defense of American diplomats and civil servants like this before?
Not quite like this, Nora. You know, public service veterans, career employees like this come to Congress all the time, but the ambassador seemed to understand she had a pretty broad audience and an opportunity to defend her colleagues. The fact that she went all the way back to the hostages held by the Iranian regime in the 70s, to the death of Ambassador Chris Stevens a few years ago, to those that have suffered from those rare audio attacks in China and Cuba, and then the growing concerns here in Washington and across the diplomatic corps about the ongoing brain drain at the State Department headquarters. She took full advantage of the moment. But one thing I want to convey here, Nora, as they head to votes, Republicans and Democrats are responding in real time via text message to this. I asked one senior Republican aide, what did you make of that tweet from the president? Quote, that tweet did not help, this aide says. Would have been much better if it just pointed out that she admitted she didn't have firsthand knowledge and was 2 months away from that July 25th call. So Republican leadership now admitting what the president did there was not helpful in any way. Democrats, meanwhile, they might be taking cartwheels on their way to this vote right now. Very pleased by what they've seen so far this morning. Very strong for us, one Democratic member says. She's a great witness so far. Another pointing out that they're struck by the contrast now between the professionalism and the patriotism of the three witnesses that have testified so far and the reaction from Republicans on the dais and what the president said this morning. So clearly Democrats believe they're in good shape. There had been some concern. What was she going to share today that would move the ball forward or perhaps draw more public interest and concern to these proceedings? And clearly now, based on her testimony and based on the president's reaction in real time, we now have a bit of intrigue and a belief among Democrats that they may now have the president in quite a spot.
We're going to go down two tracks, everybody, in our coverage here. We're going to talk about the political effect, because impeachment is a political act that the House will take. And I want to talk about the substantive effect, too, about what this is doing to America's strength around the world and foreign policy. So, but quickly on that political track, because, Ed, there's been much discussion about the lack of a defense within the White House or the president. This is why you need trained lawyers around you and a defense so that you don't further get yourself in trouble as a political inquiry is made against you. And the president doesn't have a team right now. He's brought on Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida, and another individual to help him. They're not yet ready on board, and so the president is tweeting about that. And he's not on message with what the Republicans are doing in the House of Representatives. Does he have a weak defense, a weak team? Does he need a stronger team?
I mean, fellow Republicans would say, yes, he does. But, of course, remember, he said a few weeks ago on the South Lawn, I don't need a team. I've got this. I can do it on my own. All they have, Nora, is this 18-page memo that was sent out earlier this week by Republican leadership up here on the Hill that outlines basically their belief that ultimately what happened here does not establish an impeachable offense. And it goes through some of the content of their concerns with the testimony that they'll hear from witnesses. But otherwise, most of the Republican concern up here has been about the process, their belief that certain witnesses aren't going to be brought out into the public sphere, that they're not going to be able to ask certain questions or call people like Hunter Biden to testify. Democrats argue there's no need to do that because he's not relevant to this process. So you could argue certainly here that while it started out pretty coordinated, the White House releasing right at 9 a.m. the call from April between the new Ukrainian president and President Trump and having Devin Nunes read it out into the public record, that was perfect. That was clearly coordinated. But having him spout off that tweet a little while later, clearly, as Republican leadership is now telling us, not helpful at all.
I want to bring in Paula Reed, who is at the White House and continuing that discussion about the president's defense. But also, just explain, because now this has become an issue about the president's tweet today, which is now being used as a threat of intimidation against an American diplomat. Does the president sit there and tweet, or does someone tweet for him? Explain how that process works.
There are some tweets that are composed on behalf of the president, but most of them he composes himself. And this appears to be in his voice, and he has no incentive to tweet something like this in the middle of an impeachment hearing. It's definitely a switch up in his strategy. On Wednesday, he was mostly retweeting supporters. He did that about 30 times. But here, for the first time, he directly attacked a witness and gave the chairman of this committee an opening to establish that perhaps the president was trying to intimidate a witness, which could potentially factor into those articles of impeachment. But so there's something else in his tweet that's significant. This is a talking point. This is a mischaracterization that the president has repeated. He talks about how Marie Yovanovitch was somehow responsible for political unrest in Somalia and Ukraine, but then he also references how the president of Ukraine spoke unfavorably about her. And Nora, every time the president has been asked about the ambassador, this is what he goes to. He says, I didn't know her, but the president of Ukraine spoke unfavorably about her. But if you look at that transcript of their July phone call, President Trump brings her up first. He is the one who describes her as, quote, bad news. And then the president of Ukraine chimes in. So definitely a switch up in the strategy, directly attacking the witness, but using some of the talking points that he's been using for weeks.
All right, Paula, and I want to also ask you about, I feel like today, even walking into this, that this would not only be a question of the intimidation of a career foreign policy official, but also the focus would center on Rudy Giuliani today. Why was Rudy Giuliani feeding information to the president about Ambassador Yovanovitch? Why has he become such a central character in this Ukraine policy, and whether the president's personal lawyer has served the interests of his client in this regard? Describe how Rudy Giuliani has really now become, in some ways, really a hindrance to the president's future.
It is remarkable that he continues to be a member of the president's personal legal team, Nora. Now, I am told that he's not supposed to handle any matters related to Ukraine, but we saw earlier this week he published an op-ed defending his client in the Wall Street Journal. Then he did, with his attorney, he did an interview with The Guardian earlier this week. So he's still out there on this issue, and there are questions about why the president continues to employ him in this role. But I am told that the president still believes that Rudy Giuliani brings gravitas to his defense. He still sees Rudy Giuliani the way he was around 9/11. He believes that he is valuable. But CBS News has confirmed Rudy Giuliani is under investigation by federal prosecutors in Manhattan for possibly violating federal lobbying laws through this pressure campaign, as he was trying to pressure the president and other entities to push out the ambassador. The question is, well, why? Was he doing this on behalf of his clients? There's also questions about whether he was frustrated that she was somehow blocking efforts to investigate Joe Biden. So that question of why Rudy Giuliani was doing this, that is actually under federal investigation by the president's own Justice Department.
All right, Paula Reed, thank you. Want to go back now to Capitol Hill because we still have the Republicans questioning of Ambassador Yovanovitch. Nancy Cortez is on Capitol Hill, as has been reported by Ed and major Republicans, sort of stunned by the president's tweeting and attacking her personally. What will the Republican lawyer and lawmakers do?
Well, they're going to go down two central tracks, Nora. First of all, they are going to try to make the point that the president was under no obligation to keep Yovanovitch in her post as ambassador to Ukraine, that he didn't do anything wrong by recalling her as the president of the United States. He has the right to remove any ambassador at any time. So they are going to say that the fact that she went home a few months early doesn't indict the president in any way. And then beyond that, they're going to argue, they've been making this case all along, that all of this evidence is hearsay and secondhand and thirdhand. What they're going to say in Yovanovitch's case is that she wasn't a witness at all to the central incident that Democrats are now pointing to as, in their words, a case of bribery, because the military aid that the president withheld in July, about $400 million worth, that happened after she had already left Ukraine. So they'll say she doesn't have any special insight into what happened there, into why the president withheld the aid, into what both U.S. officials and Rudy Giuliani were telling Ukrainians about what they needed to do to have that aid unfrozen. So they're going to say that, Democrats are trying to prop her up as a star witness when really she wasn't privy to the events in question.
All right, quickly also, that's what we're going to come back to that in a little bit, but also behind closed doors, there's another testimony today, right?
That's right. David Holmes, he is a staffer at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine. He has come back to Washington. He's going to be interviewed later today by congressional investigators because he told the current top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine that he actually overheard a phone call between Ambassador Gordon Sondland and the President of the United States in which the President asked about these investigations.
Nancy Cordes, thank you. We should note that the House Intelligence Committee hearing is expected to be in recess for about an hour or so. We will return when the committee's Republican counsel starts questioning Ambassador Yovanovitch. Our coverage of the impeachment hearings will continue on our 24-hour streaming network, CBSN, and you can watch it at cbsnews.com or our CBS News app. Download it. Those of you in the West will now return to CBS This Morning. This has been a CBS News special report. We will be back on the air when the hearing resumes. I'm Norah O'Donnell, CBS News, Washington.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.